Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we streamline your knowledge acquisition. You've given us some really compelling source material this time.
We have. It's excerpts from a historical speech by Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
Right, from January 1st, 1980. It's titled, Grateful God's Day, the Dawn of a New Global Cycle.
And that's the key. This isn't just any speech. It's a massive declaration, philosophical, theological, you name it, delivered on a very symbolic day.
The 13th God's Day celebration, and also his 60th birthday.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really understand this blueprint. It sets this incredibly aggressive timetable for the unification movement and makes some dramatic geopolitical predictions for the 80s and beyond.
Okay, let's unpack this. The whole structure seems built around this idea of cycles, a huge imminent shift in direction.
It is. So if you're the listener, you're being told that history itself is about to pivot.
And it all starts with the number 60.
Yes, we have to begin there. The bedrock of the argument is the significance of 60 in Oriental philosophy. 60 years completes one full cycle.
A calendar, a generation.
All of it wrapped into one, and when that 60th cycle is done, it doesn't just renew, it actually begins again, but in the opposite direction.
So it's like history hits a full stop, resets the counter, and then decides to, reverse its velocity.
Precisely. And the source applies this on two really powerful levels. First, there's the personal one.
His own 60th birthday.
Right. It marks the end of his original limited circle and the start of a new limitless one. He can now move forward without restriction.
And the second level is divine. We're drawing an analogy back to the creation story.
Exactly. Heavenly Father took 6 days to create, but the seventh day, the Sabbath, that's the spiritual start of a whole new cycle of existence, a new beginning.
So that transition from 6 to 7 is the core spiritual marker for the entire decade.
It is. Which brings us to the real-world application. The one that, must have raised some eyebrows back in 1980.
Okay, so if this 60-year cycle is true, you have to look back to 1917.
The Bolshevik Revolution, the start of organized world communism.
You apply the 60-year marker, and suddenly 1980 becomes this moment where the entire communist power structure just hits a historical wall.
That's the core geopolitical claim in the source. By 1980, communism's dominant historical cycle is, it's complete, and the new cycle that begins will be smaller and more feeble.
But it's key that he isn't predicting some instantaneous collapse on January 1st, right? So it's not a light switch.
Not at all. It's the beginning of an inevitable systemic decline.
This raises a huge theological question, though, which the source actually gets into. Why was communism, what's called the satanic side here, allowed to get so dominant for 60 years in the first place?
The source explains this through a kind of divine allowance. The speaker claims that Satan argued with God, basically saying, look, I took over the world and took care of it for 6,000 years, so isn't it fair I get a brief period to govern?
And the rationale for God actually allowing it, it's kind of shocking. It's rooted in meritocracy, of all things.
It is. It's based on a spiritual work ethic. The source suggests God had to allow it because at that point in history, Satan's children, the communists, were presented as being more hardworking.
More dedicated to their goals than God's children.
Exactly. So it was a temporary concession based purely on effort.
So if the cycle of 6 is over, we're moving into the cycle of 7, the source really leans into this numerology.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are contrasted so starkly. Satan took the number 6 in the Garden of Eden, so he's represented by 666.
And God, on the other hand, always consummates his divine process, the dispensation, with the number 7.
6 is failure or concession. 7 is completion, divine prosperity.
Which sets up this really aggressive timetable. If 6 is over, the 1980s will bring heavenly prosperity, and all the ideals and dreams in God's dispensation will be completed before the year 2000.
A 20-year plan for global completion. And to really solidify that expectation, he draws a parallel to his own history.
His 40 years of battling forward.
Right, from about 1940 onward. He says it was equivalent to the Hebrews' 40 years in the wilderness.
That analogy immediately tells the listener, okay, the wandering is over, the promised land is in sight.
And that means it requires immediate, massive action, which brings us to what the speaker calls the movement's strategic secret weapon.
Okay, let's make that transition from the global 60-year timeline to the immediate action plan, home church.
Yes. The source describes this strategy as being prepared like a secret bomb, one that Satan couldn't find, and 1980 was the time to ignite it.
And just to clarify for you, the listener, home church is a strategy where members take responsibility for a specific geographic area.
Hmm.
right? Like 360 homes.
That's right. They treat it as their spiritual family. They're meant to nurture that community as the base for the kingdom of heaven.
The 1980 motto really hammers it home. Home church is the base of the kingdom of heaven.
It does. But the metaphor used for the outcome, it's anything but gradual. It's
Right.
explosive. Well, the goal is total transformation and fast. The speaker says home church is like a gasoline tank, and the members are a fireball landing right in it.
Wow. And the explosion from that is supposed to provide the momentum to go all the way to heaven in one stroke.
Home church is the launching pad. That's the term he uses.
That metaphor puts some pretty intense, almost violent pressure on this plan. If the stakes are that high, you need absolute trust. What proof does he offer?
He points to his own prophetic track record. He recalls prophecies from 20 years earlier, back in 1960.
Okay.
At the ceremony for the true parents, that's the speaker and his wife, he made two predictions that at the time seemed just impossible.
What were they?
He said he would have members in 130 countries and that communism would be in definitive decline by the 80s and 90s.
And even his loyal members were skeptical.
Deeply. The source says they thought he was just trying to comfort the members, not making serious predictions. So the argument is, since those impossible claims came true, absolute trust is now required for home church.
And this demand for trust comes with an incredibly high standard for performance.
The standard is, well, it's defined by comparison. Members have to be superior to the highest satanic standard.
And better than all loyal subjects who have ever served God in the past.
That's the minimum for participating in this new seven-cycle era.
This high standard leads us right into the analysis of global cultures. Specifically, the relationship between East and West.
Right, which is really the foundation for the whole geopolitical strategy that follows. The speaker breaks down this philosophical difference between Western and Oriental attitudes.
Western culture is described as shallow and superficial.
Because it's focused on the material world, wanting everything out front, it's all about rapid physical development.
Whereas the Oriental attitude is deeper and more sustaining. It prioritizes spiritual perfection, but often by denying the material world.
So it's an imbalance in the opposite direction. And the conclusion is that neither extreme is ideal on its own. The speaker says he had to find the happy medium.
And this division, according to the source, wasn't just random. It was part of God's plan for history.
That's the bold claim, yes. God's plan was that Western powers would develop the material world that the religious Oriental cultures denied.
So the source claims that when countries like China and India were overtaken by the West, it was actually a sign.
A historical mechanism, a sign that a new religious awakening was close at hand, which would then bring in democratic wins and equality after World War II.
This context then connects directly to America's unique position. God gave America incredible material blessing.
But, and this is a huge but, that wealth was not meant just for American consumption.
The core idea being that all wealth belongs to God, and America was meant to be a steward.
Exactly, a steward, using its resources for all of humanity. And the critical finding in the speech is that America failed its stewardship test.
Hold on, let me stop you there. That's a radical claim. America fails its divine test, and the consequence is that this God-given wealth defaults to Satan, which then empowers communism. How is that justified?
It's a mechanism of, let's say, divine utilization. Since America failed to distribute the wealth as God intended, the source says only Satan can legitimately claim it. So it ends up benefiting communism.
That seems like a total contradiction. How can God use his enemy?
He uses the core idea within Marxism that economic wealth belongs to the collective, to the government, for all people. God is actually taking advantage of this Marxist teaching to shatter wealthy capitalist nations that only focused on their own self-interest?
It's a divine strategy to reset the world's focus to collective welfare.
Precisely. Which brings us to the only solution for America's survival. If America doesn't change, a communist takeover is seen as inevitable.
And the only way to prevent that is if the speaker tells Americans that their wealth doesn't belong to them alone.
It has to be given for the sake of the world. The solution is repentance through action, through sharing resources.
And this is where the micro-action of the movement's fundraising, the MFT effort, ties directly back into these macro geopolitical stakes.
Exactly. Since the source says Americans haven't given their wealth to the world, the movement is taking on that mission. The speaker's words are, "We are going to give it to the world in their place."
So that fundraising effort is seen as essential. It's reclaiming wealth from Satan's claim and fulfilling America's abandoned stewardship.
Yes. And that brings us from The strategy and geopolitics to the emotional and theological heart of the celebration itself, Grateful God's Day.
January 1st.
Yeah.
And the source has this really specific, unique description of God on this day.
It's maybe the most intimate and surprising claim in the whole speech. On God's Day, God is like a hungry person who is finally eating.
Eating what?
He's consuming the intoxicating fragrance and taste and touch of love that's generated by his children.
And the divine state that results from this is, well, it's extraordinary. God
Yeah.
becomes intoxicated and fall asleep.
Rendered momentarily unconscious by this perfect selfless love, he can only sense the whispering and breathing of his children.
That intimacy is what makes it Grateful God's Day. God opens his eyes to see his sons and daughters touching him, feeling thankful happiness after millennia of suffering.
And the source insists this feeling is so mystical, so incredible, that no human language can really describe it.
It totally reframes the movement's purpose, doesn't it? It's about creating this one moment of divine, intoxicated happiness.
It is, and it uses this context to pivot the listener's focus away from political battles. The point is, when you're focused on meeting this ultimate divine expectation, your toughest competition is not the communists.
That's a huge pivot. If it's not an external enemy, who are the true competitors then?
The source identifies two, the speaker himself, and then God is listed as an even tougher competitor.
So the competition is internal, a battle against your own limitations.
It is, but it's a paradoxical competition. While God is the ultimate standard for success, he is also your ultimate cheerleader, pushing you and supporting you to win.
So by striving to meet God's expectations, the highest possible standard, you'll have surpassed any communist enemy 10 times over.
Right. The goal is internal spiritual achievement, not external political victory.
Which brings this entire deep dive back to one conclusion. Action, not more analysis.
Exactly. The desired response from the listener is summed up in one sentence, basically. Father, you've given me everything I need. All I need now is action. If you speak to us more, it will only complicate my mind.
The conversation itself becomes redundant once the mandate is clear.
It's a powerful way to end.
It is. We've covered a remarkable range of topics in this deep dive. The 60-year historical timetable for communism's decline, the strategy of home church as this explosive launching pad,
The analysis of American wealth as failed stewardship, and that surprising theological detail of God's intoxication on God's day.
the core takeaway for you, the learner, is this concept of a grand, impending historical transition.
Right, the move from the number 6 to 7. And it requires absolute trust, total commitment, and it has to be driven by highly energetic strategic action and the selfless stewardship of resources for humanity.
You now have the timeline, the strategy, and the philosophical backdrop that really drove the movement at the dawn of the 1980s.
This does raise an important question, though. Given the source's strict criteria that you must be superior to the highest satanic standard and better than all loyal subjects of the past, if God is framed both as the ultimate competitor and the ultimate cheerleader who wants you to win, what specific measurable action outside of your current habits would you take this week to ensure you begin meeting that incredibly high standard?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.